You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, going through the Spurs' 8-game winning streak, diving into where the Spurs rank through 30 games of the season, and finally, are the Spurs now a title contender? Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. I'm glad to be back on. I know it's been quite a while since you've heard my voice. It was actually technically way back on December 7th. I had just previewed the Spurs' games against the New Orleans Pelicans when the winning streak started, and then also they had a game coming up against the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Cup quarterfinals, and I'll explain why I didn't record for 2 weeks after that, or almost 3 weeks since then. So let's go ahead and go through the Spurs' 8-game winning streak, and again, I'll explain why I haven't been on the pod much. So let's go back to December 8th. The Spurs are on the road in New Orleans. San Antonio is favored by 8.5 points. They led by as many as 25 points, but the Pelicans did battle back, and the Spurs barely escaped with a 3-point win. Then on December 9th, the Spurs are on the road in Los Angeles to play the Lakers. This was an NBA Cup quarterfinals game. The Lakers were favored by 7.5 points. The Spurs led by 24 points without Victor Wembanyama. They ended up winning by 13 points to advance to the semifinals in Las Vegas against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So now that Saturday game against the Thunder comes in Vegas on a Saturday, and this is when I, got sick, basically. I ended up getting an upper respiratory infection that really, took out my voice. It was tough to watch that game. I was basically on medication most of that game, and I had to go back and watch it. So I've just basically been writing these last 2 weeks because, I had that sick, nasally voice for a while. For almost like 2 weeks, my voice wouldn't come back. And so I don't like listening to pods whenever the host is like sick. You can just tell. I just don't like listening to that. So I didn't want to put you all through that. So that's why I've kind of taken it. I've been writing. Obviously, if you follow my newsletter, thespotupshot.com, you'll see that I've obviously been almost every day writing about the Spurs, but I didn't want to get back on the pod until my voice was almost 100% back. So now it has been almost 2.5 weeks. My voice is back. So now let's continue with the winning streak. So again, the Spurs defeat the Pelicans. They beat the Lakers. So now we go to December 13th. The Spurs are in Vegas for the semifinals against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder were favored by 10.5 points, but it was the Spurs. They fell behind by 16 points in the first half. They overcame that deficit and ended up beating the Thunder in crunch time by 2 points. This basically let the Spurs move on to the championship game for the NBA Cup against the New York Knicks. So then on December 16th, the Spurs are playing the Knicks in Vegas for the championship. It was a close game throughout, but the Knicks did out-execute the Spurs in crunch time, and they ended up winning by 11 points. This game, though, I will say, did not count for the Spurs' record, nor for any of their individual stats. So again, the winning streak does stay intact because that Knicks game did not count for the Vegas Cup championship. So now that Spurs' winning streak stands at 3-0 with that win over the Thunder in Vegas. So now the Spurs return home on December 18th to host the Washington Wizards. The Spurs were favored by 15.5 because the Wizards are not a good team. And the Spurs led by 26 points and ended up winning by 25, so took care of business. Then the Spurs had to get on the road and go back to Atlanta now for December 19th game, a home-to-road back-to-back against the Hawks, who are one of the better teams in the league this year. The Spurs, though, were favored by 3.5, and they just basically demolished the Hawks. They ended up leading by as many as 38 points, their largest lead of the season, and then they ended up winning that game by 28 points against Atlanta. Then on December 21st, the Spurs would go to Washington to face the Wizards again. Now the Spurs are favored by 15.5 points, and the Spurs did lead by as many as 24, but basically they didn't like demolish the Wizards like they did against the Hawks, so they ended up winning by 11 points. But hey, a win is a win, even if it felt some sort of a letdown. And then the most two recent wins for the Spurs. So on December 23rd, they're back at home hosting the Oklahoma City Thunder for a second time this season. The Thunder were favored by 6.5 points. And the Spurs basically just took over in the fourth quarter. They ended up building a lead as large as 21 points. And then basically with 3 minutes left, Thunder head coach Mark Daigneault pulled all his starters, and the Spurs cruised to a 20-point win with their reserves taking care of business. And then the most recent win for the Spurs, which puts them on this 8-game winning streak, was Christmas Day. The Spurs are now on the road at OKC, again, the best team in the league. The Thunder were favored by 10.5 points. Maybe the expectation was they were going to finally, get a win against the Spurs. But no, basically the Spurs took command of the second half. They ended up leading by as many as 17 points, and same story. 2 minutes left in the fourth. Coach Daigneault takes out his starters. You start to see the fans in OKC file out of the arena early, and the Spurs, the Thunder did get within 9 once in the fourth quarter, but it never got to crunch time, and the Spurs ended up winning again by 15 points against the Thunder. Again, a very, very good team. So since that game against the Knicks did not count, the Spurs are currently on a 8-game winning streak, the longest win streak in the league right now. They've led by 20 points in 6 of their 8 games during this win streak, so basically just getting a lot of separation against their opponents. And they've also led by 15 points in 7 of the last 8 games. So again, just getting a healthy leads against these teams, and they're really not falling behind much by double deficits. The only time that happened was in against OKC in Vegas. I will also say they're finally 100% healthy. They've had their full rotation in place for the last 6 games, even though the rotation, yes, they have everybody available, but it's still not 100% where it's going to be, because we do know that Victor Wembanyama has been coming off the bench in these last 6 games, and he's also on a return to injury plan where we're basically seeing a very small increase in his minutes game by game, but he hasn't worked his way up to his usual 32 minutes per game just yet. So again, even though they have everybody finally available, it's still, the rotation is still not fully intact because of the role that Wemby's currently in right now. I will also say the Spurs' depth is really showing. You really don't know who's, even though they have their leading scorers, they have Wemby, they have De'Aaron Fox, they have Stephon Castle as their typical 3 leading scorers on a per night basis. During this win streak, it's really showing how much any player, whether starting or off the bench, can just pop off for 20 plus points. And we're seeing that during this win streak. During the win streak, 6 different players have been the leading scorers in the game, in those 8 games during the win streak. So again, just different players. Keldon Johnson could pop off for one night. It could be Devin Vassell. It could be Harrison Barnes. It could be Wemby. Stephon Castle. Rookie Dylan Harper, has had a career scoring night so far. So again, just different players on the Spurs are showing why part of this win streak is just their depth that really shows right now, considering that Coach Johnson has really gone to a 9-man rotation where he has Luke Cornett starting in place of Wemby, then the same usual starters, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and then off the bench it's been Dylan Harper, Julian Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, and then of course Wemby, and then of course different players mix in at that fifth spot. One player who has fallen out of the rotation since everyone's been healthy is Jeremy Sohan, and I'll be talking about a little bit more about Sohan's situation coming up in a future pod, just because we do know that he's in the last year of his contract, because he can become a restricted free agent next summer, and the trade deadline is coming up here in 2 months, almost like in a month actually, in February. So again, I'll talk a little bit more about Sohan's situation in a future pod, but again, Coach Johnson with the team fully healthy, he has been going to a 9-man rotation. One thing the Spurs have definitely been doing during this win streak is they are defying expectations. Like I mentioned, they were underdogs against the Lakers, against all 3 games against the Thunder. So technically, according to Vegas, they should have gone 4-4 in these last 8 games, but no, they've actually gone 8-0. Again, pulling off those upsets against the Lakers, and of course the 3 games against the mighty Thunder, who have have the best record in the league. All right, so since the Spurs are currently in the midst of this 8-game winning streak, one of the teams that they've beaten 3 times during this win streak is the Thunder, which is a team that most teams cannot take down in the NBA. The Spurs have kind of been the Thunder's kryptonite. So the Spurs have handed OKC 3 of their 5 losses within the last 2 weeks. The Thunder just really, it comes down to the defense for the Spurs. The Thunder cannot solve the Spurs' defense. The Spurs have held OKC anywhere between 102 and 110 in all 3 of these games. You've got really good rim protection down low with both Cornett starting and then Wemby coming off the bench. So basically 48 minutes of solid rim protection from the Spurs, and Coach Johnson will also go to the French vanilla lineup at times during games with both Wemby and Cornett in there. With Wemby especially, the Thunder just cannot buy a good quality shot. You see them settling for a lot of inconsistent floaters. They end up going into some shot clock violations, and then on their wide open threes that they're getting, they're just having really bad shooting nights as well. Not making a lot of their wide open threes. On the perimeter, the Spurs have a scheme that really works against the Thunder, where they have a lot of guards and wings who are kind of around the same size, kind of hovering that 6'6" range, kind of. And then you start, the head of that snake is Stephon Castle, who's getting the primary matchup of guarding SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's one of the favorites for the MVP in each of these games. But then if there's a switch or a pick and roll set, Devin Vassell can switch onto SGA, Dylan Harper, De'Aaron Fox, Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson, Julian Champagnie. The Spurs just have a lot of wings and guards, like I said, around the same height, who can basically switch onto SGA, Jalen Williams, all these different players on the Thunder, Cason Wallace, Alex Caruso. And then I would say too that Jalen Williams specifically hasn't really had really great games against the Spurs, considering that he's the other All-Star on the Thunder. And then also Chet Holmgren, who is projected to be an All-Star this coming season, is also having really tough nights against the Thunder, against the Spurs, whether that's just having bad shooting nights or a combination of like in the most recent game, he had a pretty good shooting night, but he's not able to get aggressive. And I would also give a lot of credit there to players like Harrison Barnes, who's guarding Chet in a lot of these games, as well as Victor Wembanyama. Luke Cornett also gets matched up on him. So again, The Spurs' defense is what's really standing out. And one other key element that they're having success against the Thunder is that they're not really letting SGA get to the foul line. That's one of the strengths in his offensive game, is getting to the foul line. And he really has been contained by Castle and the Spurs' defense. That's been a point of emphasis for the Spurs' defense heading into all three of these matchups. And so that's another reason why I think the defense, that's been the biggest issue for OKC against the Spurs. And then on the other side, the Thunder have had some trouble with the Spurs' offense on the other end, where they're having a lot of trouble containing the dribble penetration of De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, and Dylan Harper. Those three guards either get inside, get to the rim, and get points, get fouled, or they kick out to their shooters. And plus, of course, the Spurs have that X factor in Wemby, who's currently coming off the bench. So as soon as Wemby gets on the floor, he either draws double teams or traps, and then he kicks out to his teammates, or he himself can get some shots to go in, some threes, some mid rangers, also rolls and cuts, for some dunks. And so I just feel like, watching the Spurs on offense, they're really giving the Thunder defense a lot of fits. Reminds me of what the Indiana Pacers had against the Thunder in the finals last year, where they just had multiple guards who can kind of handle the ball, get into the teeth of the defense and kick out, or create for themselves, and like players like Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, and Benedict Mathurin. And I feel like that's kind of a recipe that the Spurs have with their offensive attack, of having the four guards plus having a player who you just really can't game plan for in Wemby. With you don't know how he's going to get his points, but he's going to get his points somehow in each game. So one other thing I want to say about this matchup is that the Spurs, they're showing they're comfortable, whether it's on a neutral ground in Vegas, beating OKC. They beat the Thunder, you blow out the Thunder in San Antonio by 20 points, or they went into OKC and beat them in their own building by 15 points. So I will just say right now, the Spurs are really showing that they're very comfortable, really have an edge against OKC in their first three games against them. They are going to get them twice more, I believe, in January and either in February or March, but they're going to get them two more times this season. And so, for the league, this has to look very good for the league, because they're now seeing a track record of what a team can do to beat OKC. It looks like the Thunder are beatable. Basically, the Spurs taking care of them 3 times in 2 weeks. But also for the league, this becomes a concern, because now the league has to worry, how good is San Antonio? How much have they leapt into that title contention conversation, which I'm going to talk about here a little bit later. All right, so now for our second topic, let's talk about the Spurs through 30 games of the season. So this is something I've been writing about after every 10 games. I write about how the Spurs are doing through every 10-game segment. So the last time I did it was on after 20 games. But since we're at the 30-game mark here on the day that I'm recording a pod on a Friday, I want to talk about the where the Spurs stand through the data, their strengths and weaknesses so far through 30 games of the season. So through 30 games, the Spurs have a top 5 offense ranked 5th best in the NBA, and a top 5 defense also ranked 5th best, which gives them a tie for the 4th best net rating in the league. They are currently 23-7. They have the 2nd best record out west. They are basically 1 game ahead of Denver, who's 3rd, and then they're 2.5 games behind the Thunder, who are 1st out west. Considering it didn't look like anyone was going to catch OKC this season, but now that San Antonio's handed them 3 losses in the last 2 weeks, maybe the 1 seed is kind of in play for San Antonio. All right, so let's look at some of the strengths for the Spurs on offense, looking at where they're ranked top 10 right now as of Friday afternoon when I collected this data before the games took place. So they are top 10 in scoring efficiency and per game scoring. Like I mentioned, just have they have their 3 go-to scorers in Wemby, Fox, and Castle. But then, like I said, they have a lot of double-digit scorers who can kind of pop off for any given night, whether that's Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson off the bench, Dylan Harper off the bench, Julian Champagnie on some nights. So again, they just have multiple different scorers who all have their strengths that they can go to. They're top 10 in fast break scoring. That's one of the edges for their team, is they have all those quick guards who can kind of get on the break, especially with the defense getting stops. They are top 10 in shooting the ball with their effective field goal percentage. So this is a stat that combines both the 2-point shooting with the 3-point shooting. The Spurs are top 10 there. They are able to get to the line. They have multiple players who can draw free throws, led by Stephon Castle and Wemby. Then there's De'Aaron Fox, who can get to the line at times. There's Dylan Harper off the bench. There's Keldon Johnson, who gets himself up to the foul line. Then there's Luke Cornett, on his rolls. Sometimes he gets fouled by the defense. Also Vassell can get some fouls and also free throws, and also Harrison Barnes can get aggressive driving inside at times. They are top 10 in offensive rebounding. That's one of the strengths, led by Luke Cornett, Keldon Johnson, Wemby, and Castle. And then, of course, if you're getting offensive rebounds, you're going to be a pretty good team in scoring second chance points, and that's what the Spurs are also top 10. So those are some of the areas of their strengths on offense. Looking at the bottom 10 offensive numbers, there's only one number, and it's more so adapted to the players that are on the team. So they are bottom 10 in assist percentage. They don't have like that kind of offense that used to be like that 2014 Spurs title offense where everyone's moving the ball, just a lot of motion offense, because one of the strengths about this team is they have very good players who can beat a defender off the dribble, individual offensive players. So they have players like Fox, Castle, and Harper who can get into the paint at will and live in there and kind of create for themselves or others. And then, of course, they have Wemby who can draw defense, whether that's from out of the perimeter, down to the low block, at the nail, at the free throw line. So again, it's just more so the reason why they're bottom 10 in the assist percentage is just because they have more so one-on-one attack defenders who can kind of break down a defense on their own and then get their teammates involved or score themselves. So that's why, again, it's not too worrisome that they're bottom 10 in assist percentage. It's just more so a product of the kind of individual offensive players they have. All right, now let's look at the location scoring strengths on offense where the Spurs are top 10. So they are top 10 in rim makes. They really get to the rim a lot, led by players like Luke Cornett, who scores right at the rim with his alley-oop finishes. Dylan Harper gets in there, Keldon Johnson, Stephon Castle. You got Wemby, you got Fox. Like I mentioned earlier, they're one of the top 10 teams in free throw makes. They're actually top 10 as well in mid-range accuracy, even though they don't take a lot of mid-range jumpers. The three players who really go to the mid-range shot in their shot diet are Wemby, Devin Vassell, and De'Aaron Fox. They're also top 10 in three-point accuracy, so this is an improvement for the team. This has been one of the concerns for them, where basically everyone in the rotation is shooting 35% or better from three right now, except for three players, and that's Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, and Luke Cornett. Now, Castle and Harper have had some strong games from three. Castle recently had a 4 of 6 shooting night from three, and then against the Thunder, and then Harper also had like a 3 of 5 night. Plus, in that Cup championship, he went 5 of 7. But overall, those two players are shooting below 30%. And then, of course, we know Cornett isn't a three-point shooter, so that's why he's ranked in here. But other than that, I mean, everyone else is, like I said, they're shooting 35% or better from three everyone else who's in the rotation. And obviously, when I talked about earlier how Jeremy Sohan's fallen out of the rotation, well, then that takes out one bad shooter from the rotation, the fact that Sohan's not getting any minutes right now. The Spurs are also top 10 in open three-point makes and accuracy. So when the defender's 4 to 6 feet away, so kind of close by, but still giving an open shot, the Spurs are shooting well from that range. Now, as far as location scoring weaknesses, where they're bottom 10, floater range makes, but this isn't too concerning because, again, the floater shot is a really bad shot. It's not an efficient shot, so it's good that the Spurs are not taking a lot of shots from there. The only two players who really go there in their shot diet are Fox and Castle, but both of them do shoot well from that floater range area. And then they're also bottom 10 in wide open three-point makes and accuracy. They're ranked 23rd here. And so, I've recently written about, I wrote a piece over on thespotofshot.com where I looked at, most of the Spurs players, like I said, they shoot comfortable when the defender's 4 to 6 feet away, but then when that defender's 6+ feet away, they don't make their shots from there. It's like a mental thing where it's that thing where the defense is purposely leaving you open on purpose, and maybe that becomes a mental part of the game. But there's definitely a clear difference between when a defender's 4 to 6 feet away, the Spurs are top 10 shooting from there from three, whereas when it's the defender's completely out of the picture and they're just leaving them wide open, the Spurs don't shoot so well from there. So that's just something to watch going forward. All right, now let's look at where the Spurs' defense is top 10. So far the season, they're top 10 in defensive efficiency and opponents' points per game. One of the things that used to be a hallmark of a Greg Popovich defense was not letting opponents beat you out on the fast break, and the Spurs are excellent here. They're top 10 in opponent fast break scoring, not letting opponents beat them from there. Opponents are struggling to shoot against them overall when you combine both the 2-point and 3-point percentage, which is that effective field goal percentage. Another hallmark of an old Coach Pop defense was not putting your opponent on the free throw line. The Spurs are top 10 here and not letting opponents get to the line. And then also keeping opponents off the offensive glass to kill you on second chance points. The Spurs are excellent here in not giving up a lot of second chance points or opportunities to the opponents. And, they have really good key rebounders. Obviously, they're led by Wemby, who just gobbles up so many defensive boards. But then they've got a lot of good rebounding wings and guards. Players like Julian Champagnie coming off the bench for boards. Keldon Johnson's a strong rebounder. Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and Dylan Harper get in there as well on the defensive glass. So just a lot of players kind of just attacking that gang rebounding and not letting opponents beat them on the offensive glass, which was an issue for the Spurs last season once Wemby went down in February. As far as the defensive weakness, where they're bottom 10, the only place I found was opponent turnover percentage. So basically I think this can be attributed to not having Wemby for those 12 games. I think that they're just playing more safer defense. The Spurs are not taking a lot of gambles, and so you don't see where the opponent, they're not really turning over the opponent. I think that if as we see Wemby's minutes and his role start to increase, I think we will see the Spurs get a little bit more aggressive and trying to hound defenders and really, going for more riskier plays in terms of trying to get some steals and deflections, things like that. And so I think that number could see an increase the opponent turnover percentage. Now, as far as opponent location scoring, the strengths for the Spurs is defense. They really take away the rim from the opponents. Opponents' rim accuracy is, basically the Spurs are top 10 here in terms of, lowest field goal percentage there at the rim. And so obviously this gets attributed to having both Kornet and Wemby on the floor for 48 minutes of a game. Opponents also don't score very well in the paint against having, Wemby and Kornet there. And then, of course, like I mentioned, the Spurs do not put their opponents on the free throw line much. So they're very disciplined in that part of their defense. As far as location scoring weaknesses where the Spurs are bottom 10, the only place I would say is opponent mid-range accuracy. Opponents do shoot well from the mid-range, but that's okay because really that's the only place that an opponent can get a safe shot against the Spurs' defense because, like I said, you usually have Wemby and Kornet in drop, protecting the paint, so it's hard to get a quality shot there against them. And then on the perimeter, you have all those guards and wings kind of switching and just, being out there running off the three-point line or contesting shots. And so that's probably the only place where opponents can get a good quality shot is the mid-range. And so that's why that number's there. But again, the Spurs, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, they're not losing that that mid-range battle too much. I also want to mention that even though the Spurs aren't top 10 in defense from the three-point line, I will say they have improved because when I did my analysis after the 20-game mark of the season, that was definitely a concern for them was their defensive numbers look really bad perimeter-wise. And now they're closer to like league average or right within, closer to that top 10 range, almost there in both opponent attempts from three, opponent makes from three, and also opponent accuracy from three. Now let's move on to the math game for the Spurs. Where are their biggest advantages in terms of winning the three-point line, the 2-point range, or the free throw line. So the biggest edge for the Spurs has been their free throw line battle, where they're winning that battle by 94 points total this season. So they're getting themselves to the line, but then they're also not letting the opponent get to the line. So that's a significant advantage for the Spurs. Next up, it's actually their three-point shooting. They're actually outscoring opponents by 69 points from three. And I do want to note that we see that when the Spurs win or tie the three-point line, they're now 17-2 this season. So if they can just either win that three-point line battle or even tie the opponent on a night-to-night basis, they're going to mostly win those ball games, is what we're seeing so far. And then lastly, the other edge that they have, it's their lowest edge, but it's still an edge, is that they're a plus 50. They're outscoring their opponents by 50 points on twos. That's combining, all of the inside scoring, the paint, plus the mid-range. So again, overall, the Spurs are a plus 213 points for the season. They have the fourth best plus minus in terms of overall points, behind only the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, and the Houston Rockets. Now let's break this down into a per scoring kind of game basis. So again, looking at the different areas on the floor. So the Spurs are winning their average game by 7.1 points per game. So a healthy, win margin. From dunk layup range, they're winning this area by 4.8 points per game. So basically, attacking the rim themselves, but then also, limiting the opponents getting to the rim. They are losing the floater range battle by 1.4 points per game, which again isn't too much. And also that's a non-efficient shot. So you really don't want to be taking that shot in your offense. So overall, they are winning the paint by 3.5 points per game. Now, like I mentioned earlier, they are losing the mid-range battle, but barely. They're only losing the mid-range battle by 1.8 points per game, and then they're barely winning the three-point battle in a per-night basis by 2.4 points per game. So now let's look at the health of the team, just through 30 games, who has been present and on the floor for out of the rotation of these 9 players. So let's begin with the players who have been 100% healthy so far this season. That's Devin Vassell has played every game so far, Harrison Barnes, Julian Champagnie, and Keldon Johnson. And so Vassell, that was one of his goals. He said he wanted to play in every game this year because he's been hampered by injuries throughout his career so far. And so far through 30 games at least, he's made it through 100% of his games. Next up, both De'Aaron Fox and Luke Kornet have played in 73% of their games so far this season. Fox, I will say, is questionable to play Saturday against the Utah Jazz with left adductor tightness, according to the team. So there's a chance he might have to miss that game. Stephon Castle has been able to play in 70% of his games. Dylan Harper has played in 67% of his games. And then Wemby has played in 60% of his games, as he's even though he's playing every night, he's not quite up to where he's going to be with him being on that return to injury plan. So basically, by the end of the year, if a player wants to qualify for end of year awards, they need to have played in at least 79% of their games. That's kind of where the health of the team stands so far. Let's keep going. All right, so now for our third topic, with the Spurs being on this 8-game winning streak and taking down some quality teams like the Thunder, who are the title favorites, I do want to look at that question of, are the Spurs a contender? So I have some different data points I want to hit right now, and some different projection models as well. So by record, the Spurs are on pace for a 62.8 win season. The fact that they're 23-7 right now, and according to Cleaning the Glass, they are on pace for they're playing like a 55.4 win team. So again, they look like those numbers, 62 wins or 55 wins, looks like the kind of record a title contender would need. I also usually consider a title contender to be a team that ranks in both the top 10 of offense and defense. And so, looking at Cleaning the Glasses numbers, I like to use their numbers because they do take out a lot of the garbage time data. So basically the most competitive minutes in a game. The Spurs are right there, having both the top 10 offense and defense, along with the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Detroit Pistons, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and Houston Rockets. So those 5 teams, the Thunder, Pistons, Spurs, Wolves, Rockets, those 5 teams all are ranked in the top 10 of offense and defense according to Clean the Glass. Now, I would still also throw in Denver and New York both in there, just because I think they're also title contenders, even though they're not in the top 10 of some of those both of those statistics. Now, what does Vegas say? According to DraftKings.com, I looked up their odds today. The Spurs are tied for the 5th best championship odds with the Los Angeles Lakers at plus 1,600. So again, the Spurs are a top 5 title favorite team according to Vegas's odds. So the favorite is the Oklahoma City Thunder still at plus 115. Then it's the Denver Nuggets at plus 650. Then it's the Houston Rockets at a further jump at plus 1,100, and then it's the New York Knicks at plus 1,200. And of course, the Knicks are in the easier conference to try to get to the finals, whereas all these other teams are all West teams. So again, I think that, yes, Vegas even agrees that the Spurs are a top 5 contender right now, being tied with the Lakers at plus 1,600. Now let's go to ESPN's projection model called the BPI model. I looked at their data. It was updated as of December 26th, and I'm recording this episode. So the Spurs, according to their model, now have a 99.9% chance of making the playoffs. They have a 99.2% chance of getting a top 6 seed. And then they're projected to end up with the 3rd seed by the end of the year. So right now the Spurs are projected to be a top 3 team in the Western Conference. Now, according to this model, BPI, the Spurs have the 4th best odds out west to make the finals, behind with 6.6% chance odds. The teams in front of them, of course, are the Thunder, who are heavy favorites still to get to the finals at 61.6%. The Rockets are at 14.1%, and then the Nuggets are 13.9%. But again, the Spurs have jumped in front of both the Lakers and the Timberwolves to now have the 4th best chance or odds of getting to the NBA Finals according to the BPI model. Now, as far as winning the championship, winning the finals, the Spurs have the 6th best odds at 3.4%. So they're behind, of course, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are favorites at 51.9%. The New York Knicks, who have a 12.3% chance here. The Rockets at 9%. The Denver Nuggets at 8.8%, and then of course the Detroit Pistons, who are at 4.1%. So again, the Spurs have the 6th best odds of winning the finals. So again, another strong argument that yes, they are title contenders. All right, so lastly, the last thing I want to look at is how does your team play against some of the better teams in the league? So when I say some of the best teams in the league, I'm talking about teams that are 600 or better by record as of Friday afternoon that I'm recording this that I gathered this data. So out east, the Spurs haven't played any of the title contenders. So the 3 teams who have a better than 600 record out east are the Detroit Pistons, the Boston Celtics, and the New York Knicks. Now, I know they played the Knicks and they lost in the Cup Championship, but that didn't really count for the standings and records. So again, for now, I won't count that Knicks game, even though the Spurs will be seeing the Knicks in a real game here in terms of for the schedule coming up here on New Year's Eve. So for right now, they haven't played any of the contenders out east according to this metric. Now, they have played quite a few Western Conference teams, some of the best West teams out in the West so far. So they've played 8 games against these teams. The Oklahoma City Thunder, the Spurs are 3-0 against them. The Denver Nuggets, the Spurs are 1-0 against the Nuggets. The Los Angeles Lakers, the Spurs are 1-1. The Minnesota Timberwolves, the Spurs are 0-1, and then the Houston Rockets, the Spurs are 1-0. So again, against these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams, including the Spurs, who are 600 or better out west. So again, I consider these teams like the title contenders. The Spurs are 6-2 so far through 8 games, and again, it's very, very notable that they are 3-0 against the best team out west and in the league, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder. So again, I think that's a very strong indication is that against the top teams, they are showing up and they're winning these games, 6-2 against these 8 teams so far, or these 8 games. Now, what about how do you execute in crunch time? I think that's another indicator of a title favorite. I would say yes, the Spurs are showing that they are when crunch time games come, they are showing that they can't step up and execute in those final moments. So they are 12-3 right now in crunch time. They have the 2nd best win percentage in crunch time behind only the Los Angeles Lakers. I will say though, they haven't been in a lot of crunch time games. They have the 13th. They're ranked 13th in most crunch time games, just because they have been starting to blow out teams lately during this win streak. Now, as far as their schedule, they do have a tough schedule. Out of these contenders that I talked about so far, the Spurs do have the sixth toughest schedule remaining according to positiveresidual.com with a strength of schedule of 50.8%. So again, amongst all these contenders that I mentioned, I do want to say that the Spurs do have the toughest schedule left out of this group. So again, yes, overall, whether you're looking at Vegas's data, the BPI models, the Spurs' record themselves, how they're playing so far this year, who they've defeated, I would say yes. Basically, if you can go 3-0 against the Oklahoma City Thunder in different venues, I think, yes, you are a title contender. So again, I think that's where the Spurs are right now, at least through 30 games of the season. So now let's see how the Spurs do in this next week. Continue to have a happy holiday, and then also have a happy new year as we go into 2026. I will see you all in 2026. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.